I don't know how to describe it other than like a demon type of sound.
But it's silhouetted, hulking, every bit of 5.5 feet wide, 13 to 14 foot tall, pitch black.
The one thing that ran through my mind when I had this encounter was I don't have a big enough gun.
Your host, two-time witness and field researcher for more than 40 years, William Jevning. Welcome to Creek Devil.
Hello everyone, welcome to Campfire Talk. This is where we sit around the fire with our feet up with a cold drink and let the conversation flow. Tom, would you like to make an announcement before we get started?
I sure would. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Today's Campfire Talk, as always, is going to be very interesting. Forrest is going to go into some interesting cryptid that she saw, and it's also on the internet. So if you like the show, you guys know what to do. Click the like and subscribe button, share it with your friends, and if you want to take the extra step, you can either go to patreon.com/creekdevil, or if you're watching us on YouTube, there's a link in the description. Click on that if you want to do that, and you can support us that way. So that helps us to help you. And with that said, Will, hand the microphone back to you.
Well, it's interesting, the whole point of this show is this is kind of our behind the scenes talk. We just kind of go any direction we want to go. And last week, some of the listeners, and sometimes the conversation will change gears in just a moment, and it'll be going one direction and all of a sudden another direction. So there were some people who commented in YouTube about, they wanted to know about what you saw, Forrest. We started talking about the hyena-like creature. So I'll just, tell us about what that was.
Okay. Well, I have to issue an apology to the listeners because Tom had actually asked me that, and when he was talking, somebody beeped in on my phone, and so I got about half of what he said, and instead of being showing a slight level of intelligence, I should have asked him, what was that again, rather than just jumping out there and starting off on my own little tirade, but like I sometimes do, and I'm guilty of that. But I instead told him about my first encounter with Bigfoot, my first sighting with Bigfoot. And so let me get into, there were several people that actually were interested in this. This happened, my memory banks, I was actually thinking about this last night, and I think it was in 2001. And I was taking a load of horses up to Alaska, and a lady that I knew I was hauling 2 of her horses up there, and she asked, rather than flying up, she was in the military as well, rather than taking a flight up there, could she just ride along in the truck with me? And I was like, well, of course, I didn't have a problem with that. And it was good company for me. And she was far more talkative than my dog. So anyway, so we were driving along and we hit a stretch. We were on the Cassiar Highway, which is mostly a gravel topped highway. And it's on the western edge of British Columbia, and it goes into the Yukon and just hits a little bit of the Northwest Territories up there. But anyway, it's actually a shortcut. It's shorter than, cuts off about 200 miles from the Alcan. And, but places are fewer and far between up there. There's a lot of native villages and such. So it's pretty primitive up there in that area. So we're driving along, and I don't think it was too late. I could be wrong. I'm thinking it was probably 10, 11, 12 o'clock, somewhere in there. It might have been later. And we were looking for this one particular village because we were going to pull off, and they actually have an area there where you can unload the horses and everything and let them out. And so we were looking for that. And all of a sudden, we're driving down the road, and we were going up just a slight incline. I mean, it was slight. It wasn't a real steep area of the road, but I see this, I caught eye shine off to my right. And we get a lot of bear up there, and they run back and forth across the road. I've seen coyotes, seen wolf, I've seen lynxes, I've seen all, and even one time caught a wolverine up there, which is kind of a rarity. So as soon as I saw that eye shine, I slowed down. And it was when it came out of the road, we actually came to a complete stop. And she and I sat there and watched this critter come across the road, and it was a female. And the reason I say I know it was female, because following her about probably 10, 12 feet behind her was a male. I could tell immediately that it was a male. I saw the genitalia underneath. So I was looking at, I mean, I'm not going to say what we said, but it was kind of, what the heck is that? And she and I both are looking at each other, and this thing came out, and it was about the size of a small black bear. It had a canid head, but here's where the peculiarity was that it looked like a hyena. It was higher in the withers, the shoulders, and lower in the hindquarters. And it was kind of a dusky brown color, but I could distinctly see across the withers, which is the shoulder area, and into the back area, these transverse stripes coming down. I mean, they were definitely darker than the actual body color of the animal. And the first one glanced at me again as it came out on the road, and then slowly walked across. It didn't run across the road. I mean, it just, you know, it didn't act like it was frightened of me at all. And now they do get a lot of traffic up and down that road. It's used by the loggers. The logging companies pretty much help to maintain that road, and it's very well maintained. It's pretty much like driving on asphalt. But so they may have seen a lot of vehicles, trucks, and, you know, RVs and such as that going up and down that road. So I don't know, but it didn't look like in any way, shape, or form that animal was, you know, afraid of me. So she walks on across, goes into the brush. Now you have to picture this. There's a lot of brush on the side of these roads. They clear out the high forested areas, probably anywhere from 20 to 30 feet back from the road. They do clear out that area, but you still have this growth that comes in that's like, you get alders and such as that get up about, you know, 5, 6, even 7 feet. And then there'll be a ditch, and then there'll be just, you know, low shrub-like, grass-like areas along the road, you know. And so we're just kind of sitting there and looking at each other like, you know, what is that? I mean, it didn't look like any animal I'd ever seen before. And then here comes it was slightly bigger. And like I said, I could tell that it was a male because I saw the male genitalia. And he was marked exactly like the female. But he walked out, and when he got to the middle of the road, he stopped and fully turned around and looked at me. And I mean, the head was big, but he didn't look like a wolf or any type of canid I had ever seen. The head was really broad and big, almost kind of bear-like, but it wasn't a bear either. I have seen hundreds of black bear, grizzly bears, brown bears, the silver backed bears from inland Alaska, and this was not a bear. And he exhibited the exact same conformation as the female that went across the road, and with the higher withers sloping back. And the tail that they had was not long and bushy, it was short. I'm going to say it was just above the hocks in the back. That's where the bend in the leg occurs, in the back. And it ended like that above that. Now, it was hair covered, of course, but it was not long and bushy like what you see on wolves or coyotes. And I guess what was kind of unnerving to us is that thing actually turned around and looked us directly into the truck. Like, he kind of gave you that, you know what, F you look, and paused, I mean, just momentarily, just a few seconds, and then just proceeded to follow the female off. They went into the brush and then went on down. Now, there was a lake down off to my left, way down this off. It wasn't a cliff or anything, but the land actually sloped down to a lake. So I honestly think they were probably headed down there to the lake to get water. But I mean, it was unnerving that neither one of them were distressed or disturbed about our appearance on the road, and they really could have cared less. And I mean, we probably sat there for a minute or two going, what was that? I mean, and I'm like thinking, they look like hyenas. I mean, they really did look like hyenas, and on steroids even. And I've never encountered anything like this. So the next day, we stop in to get breakfast at this cafe on the CAMPFIRE there, and we were asking them, you know, do you have anything that I've never heard about that looks kind of like a hyena? And I mean, there were several people that actually, when I asked the gentleman that came up to take our order, they had actually turned around and looked at us, and somebody kind of muttered to us, what kind of drugs were you guys on? And I can assure you we weren't. And, you know, there was no partaking in alcohol or drugs or anything like that. So we weren't hallucinating. So that was kind of the answer I got. But it was almost like some of the people looked at us like, you know, you wondered if what we had seen that they knew about too. It was just kind of one of those, moments. Are we really getting the true story here? So basically, we went on to Alaska and just, you know, I told my husband about it. She told her husband about it. And we just kind of, you know, left it at that. Well, here comes the high strangeness. This had to have been, I'm going to say, and please don't hold me to the year or anything, but it was after my husband had passed away. And I was sitting in, it had to have been probably, I'm going to say 2011, 2012, somewhere in that vicinity. And I'm watching a show called Unsolved Mysteries. And lo and behold, I hear the story about this family that have killed this animal, this wolf-like animal on their property. And this was back in, I'm going to say, late 1800s, early 1900s. And the grandfather killed it. And somebody in the family was a taxidermist. So they stuffed it, put it in a glass case. And I guess this thing kind of traveled around to different places in Idaho and Montana and such as that, as how the story goes. And now this gentleman that is the grandson, and I think Spencer, if my memory holds correct, his last name was Spencer, has it now. And he actually erected a little museum there. And it's in Ennis, Ennis, Montana. And he has this little museum there with the animals stuffed in there. And the strange thing about it was I'm looking at this and I'm going, oh my gosh, that's what we saw. That's exactly like what we saw. Now, isn't that bizarre? So we got them in Montana too. Oh my gosh. So I decided to do a little investigation. So yours truly here picked up the phone and I called Montana. Got the sheriff's department because I really didn't know who else I could call. And I explained to the lady, I said, listen, I'm not a nutcase. I mean, this is just briefly gave her the Reader's Digest version of the story. And I explained to her, I said, listen, there's supposedly a little museum there in your town. And I said, I would like to get a hold of this gentleman and get some information from him. Well, she was absolutely, oh, I know him, you know. Yes, he wouldn't mind me giving his home phone number out at all. So that's exactly what she did, and I got it, and I called him, and it took, I think, a couple of days, but he actually got back to me, and we had a nice discussion on the phone about what the animal was there, and he actually sent me a little brochure from his museum, and so we had a discussion about it, and I told him, I said, I actually saw 2 of those critters just like that alive in, British Columbia. So anyway, I thought that was rather interesting. Well, here when, I guess it was last fall, Tom had sent me some pictures of an animal that they shot in Montana or Idaho. I don't remember, Tom. You might remember more accurately than me, but you actually sent me that picture of that animal, and it was a wolf-like creature, and I think we've kind of discussed it a little bit, and I said that it was kind of actually the same color of what we saw, but there were definite differences. It was a much smaller animal. The tail wasn't right, and the animal was, appreciably smaller than what we saw. So,
well, I was going to ask you about. Now, I just want to make it clear. I didn't shoot it. I wasn't with a group that shot it. Somebody had shot this thing, and I just was fortunate enough to find somebody on the internet had posted this, and it's a weird looking thing. It's like, Forrest, how many hyenas live in North America that we know of?
Well, none that I know of. But now here, I will tell you this. And actually, we need to clarify something, because yes, you had found that on the internet, and I since did some investigating on that, and because I want to be truthful, I don't want to be telling people wild tales, and they have actually done DNA tests on that animal, and it was turned out to be a non-lactating gray wolf. Now, I don't know. Maybe I don't know that much about wolves, guys. But when you say gray wolves, I mean, we have Mexican gray wolves that come up into Texas. They're gray. That's why they're called gray wolves. This was a chocolate color, if you recall, Tom. It wasn't gray at all. And I think that was what was kind of throwing people, was the color difference. But they did do a DNA
coloration
test.
Was different.
Yeah, they did do a DNA test on that animal, and it did test out to be a gray wolf. So we want to make that clear. Now, I remember back in the 60s here in Texas, and it was actually close around here, that there was a report, because my grandfather came home, and my grandfather was a great source of information. And Daddy Tab, he didn't tell wild tales, and he didn't tell tall tales. And so he came home and was telling us that some rancher had actually seen 2, that's what they were reporting, hyena-like animals on his property chasing his cattle. And he had actually taken pot shots at these things. Didn't kill one, but they were chasing his cattle. So, I mean, every once in a while you hear of stories like this, and so it makes you wonder, where in the heck are they coming from, and what you start thinking, well, have they had escapees from the zoos? Well, why in the world, if they had, I don't know of too many zoos, I'm sure they have them in Canada, but I mean, why would they head up to the walls of British Columbia? You hear, I'm sure we've got hyenas down here in the San Antonio Zoo and other zoos, but I haven't heard of any escaping, so I have a feeling that we would be alerted if something like that happened. But that
was one of the questions I had. The thing that you saw, was it hyena-ish, if I could say that, hyena-ish, or would you say, oh no, that was definitely a hyena?
It was hyena-ish, because I couldn't say, oh yes, that's a hyena. No.
Well, here's the other question.
It
Do you know
looked like.
anybody? Do you know
Go ahead.
any anthropologists? I say this tongue in cheek. Do you know any anthropologists or archaeologists? And do you know if there's any fossil remains, fossil evidence of that type of animal or the hyena in North America? Because I think they found rhinos and stuff like that.
Well, that would really fall more in the category of a paleontologist, but there are paleoarchaeologists and paleoanthropologists, and I always really was more interested in that feature than even the pre-Columbian stuff that was going on here in America. But anyway, I have never, Tom, ever heard anything like that. Never. Even your dire wolves that we have quite a few of those that came from the La Brea tar pits in California. They don't exhibit that type of conformation or structure. So we can't even say, oh, well, they're leftovers from, dire wolves. But, I think there's a lot of things. And, we have stories about, the Nahana Valley up there in Canada, and even in some places, and Fred can attest to this. I mean, if he was here, he'd tell you this is the God's honest truth. There are natives that tell stories that there are mammoths still roaming some areas. So who's to say that if we got mammoths out there, what's the possibility of still having groups of dire wolves, saber-toothed cats, and all sorts of these Pleistocene mammals that once upon a time roamed the world? I mean, archaeologists have found mammoths on an island off of Alaska, and Catalina Island as well. They were what they call pygmy mammoths. They were a smaller variety of mammoths, but they were there up until 3,000 years ago, and probably later than that. They just haven't found everything there is to find. And so, I mean, if they existed there almost up into historical times, why can't other animals have done the same thing? We don't know all there is to know about what exists out there. And I think we all can be in agreement on that one.
The craziest thing I've heard here recently is there's a company here in the United States that is trying to bring back 3 different species of animals that are long since supposedly extinct. And the 3 species that they're trying to bring back are the woolly mammoth, the saber-toothed tiger, and the dodo bird. And I thought that was just crazy, but they are trying to bring those back using DNA and all that kind of stuff.
I think we could live without the saber-toothed cats.
That's kind of what I think too.
Oh, if they keep them confined, I don't think I'd have a problem with them.
A mammoth is one thing, but
I'm not sure I'd want them wandering the wilderness.
Yeah, mammoth is one thing, but yeah, I could live without the big cat here.
Oh, come on, Will. You know how Tom and I love our cats.
My cat doesn't have fangs that are a foot long.
Built-in can openers. Built-in can openers, Tom.
Yeah, no kidding. Absolutely. And they run. I guess they could run pretty fast too.
Well, they were long-legged, from what I understand. Yeah.
Hey, Forrest, that was a pretty interesting article you sent on the legend of the Bear King of Marble Falls.
Mm-hmm.
Have you heard much about that? Yeah, the Great Bear. It's known in Texas as the Great Bear Man of Texas.
Well, I think I related that story to you all probably over a year ago. My grandfather, he was he was a good source of a lot of information, and I found it very interesting. He was the one that always told me that he had told me about that, and I think what ended up, if I remember correctly, that actually brought it up during the 60s. I'm only like 8 miles from the lake out here, and we have, Texas has a lot of man-made lakes. We only have one natural lake, and that's up in the Texas-Arkansas border. We actually used to have one here in, believe it or not, in Burnett County. It was a natural lake, but it dried up during the Pleistocene era, a long, long time, before you or I or any of us were born. So, but I think what prompted him to tell me the story of that was that they were having sightings, Bigfoot sightings, out towards the lake. Everybody was talking about it, and this was back in the 60s. And so Daddy Tab proceeded to tell me about of course, he called them woolly boogers. They were all woolly boogers to him. And I don't ever remember him referring to it as the bear man, but evidently, as the story went with that Daddy Tab told me, was that this thing, a girl, and it was in the late 1800s, early 1900s again, she encountered this critter out while she was with a flock of goats and sheep. And it came out of the brush and ran up to her on all fours, but grabbed her and took off with her. And now, I think that as Daddy Tab related, she was actually found over in Blanco County, which is the county adjacent to Marble Falls. It's just north of Marble Falls, just a few miles. It's not actually too far at all. Marble Falls actually is in Burnett County. And so this thing took her a ways, but she was found safe and sound. She was certainly not, she was, had scratches and stuff like that, but she wasn't, it hadn't really harmed her in any, horrible fashion. But now, as the story goes, some people say that it was cornered in a cave and killed. Daddy Tab said that they had people that were sent out and shot at it, and but that it was never killed, that it got away. So I guess it just depends on which story you want to believe. Now, I'm going to go with the one that my grandfather told me. So we're going to, believe that it lived to live another day. So obviously that's we do hear oftentimes about them snatching people, and they do, and way too often, sometimes it's females that they're snatching. So, and I think I've told y'all before, and it's kind of a disturbing thought, guys. I hate to say this, but the reason that a lot of people are not encouraged to keep intact, and you know exactly what I'm talking about, intact chimpanzee males in their home, they start looking, if you've got a female in the home, they start looking at that female in a sexual manner. And I know that sounds absolutely, totally disgusting, but it does happen. So, that's why usually if people have acquired male chimps, that they're usually in a sanctuary by the time they gone to the adult stage. So that way you're not having to pull their canines and castrate them and do all these other things to them. So that's where they end up. And as disgusting as that may sound, it does happen. So just have to keep that in mind. So why wouldn't Bigfoot act the same way? I've created another silence.
The sounds of silence.
Yeah, well, the silence is that everybody's minds are turning. Right? Yeah, and you start thinking about these things, and most people don't think about them, but sometimes, let's face it, it happens. So.
Well, the zookeepers, they know about this.
Yes, they do.
Wow. Well,
you know what? They're primates, and they look at us the same way. We're just, people have to understand we are the naked ape, and that's the way they look at us, even though we look at them and think, oh, we're superior to them because we have, we do this and we do that. But you know what? They don't look at us that way. Let's face it, as far as strength and agility, they got it going. I mean, there is not a gymnast in the world that could outperform a chimpanzee anywhere. So, you know, I rest my case.
Well,
hello.
Yeah. Just thinking about that, I'm thinking it's strange cross species factuation. Anyway, it's not mutual. It's not, the reverse is not true. Actually, I'm not a fan of chimpanzees. I just think I apologize for the fans of chimpanzees out there. I just think they're kind of disgusting animals. So that's just my thoughts. Well, that was interesting. On the, I want to get back to this. What's that?
I said, you know how I feel about chimpanzees.
I know exactly how you feel about them. Same way I do. I just want to get back to that hyena thing, and the fact that could it be just some sort of a relic creature that kind of has managed in very, very small numbers to survive, and now they're back, you know, maybe there's enough of because if you see one, you know, there's probably, you haven't seen the only one out there. It's like people used to think, well, there's a Bigfoot and it lives in California. No, there's a lot of them. It's like when you see a mouse in your home, you don't say, oh, I saw that mouse. I saw him a couple of times. No, it wasn't the same mouse in an hour, in a 60-minute period. It's different ones. Let me ask you this. What are your thoughts about, remember we talked with Fred last week about the apes in Alaska. Do you have what are your thoughts on that? And do you know anything about those?
You're talking about the devil monkeys?
Yeah, the devil monkeys. Yeah, not apes, monkeys. They had tails.
Well, and I think it kind of has a bearing on Bigfoot as well. I mean, we see Bigfoot and Bigfoot-like creatures. I'm not going to say that the Yeti is exactly the same as the Bigfoot we have over here in North America, because you always hear, even when the natives describe them over there, there is an apparent difference in their look and, you know, sometimes the way they act. And you've got Yowies down in Australia, and they look a little bit different. And, you know, this has to do with environmental factors. You know, you get a gene pool and it's concentrated in one area, so it's going to end up maybe looking differently than one up in Alaska or Canada or even here in the United States. We hear this all the time. Different types of Bigfoot are seen. And so there's probably some sort of maybe different species of them. I don't know. You know, I can't speak to that scientifically. I can only speak to that theoretically. We have always said that there were no primates in North America. They have found, and I think we talked about this with Fred, they have found fossils here in Texas, and I think don't hold me to this, folks, Georgia or Alabama, lemur-like fossils of primates. Lemurs are primates. So, but the thing that kind of distresses me about the devil monkeys, and this was what I found disturbing, that my Athabascan friend, she said that there's a history of them up there. The natives have spoken of them for a long time. They're violent. They're vile. They will hunt you down in packs and attack people up there. And you have historical accounts about them trying to burn them out of a cave and such, kind of like the same thing with the Lovelock giants. And so the natives kind of react in the only fashion they know how, and, you know, destroy them, get rid of them. Well, they obviously still are up there, and people have sightings of them. I'll be honest with you, I have no background that could even provide you with a primate that would react that way. I mean, chimpanzees kind of have that behavior, you know, of attacking and in mass, but monkeys, I mean, yeah, you see langurs and sometimes macaques go on retaliation to what humans or even dogs have done to them, say in India, and they will attack en masse. But I mean, that's not common. That's not common at all. And these are long-tailed critters.
And here's a disturbing thought. You've got, you're up there, you're already aware of all the other animals that'll probably eat you, like, brown bear, etc. And then you see something kind of like that, and automatically your mind might go to Bigfoot. Then it's like, oh, crap, that's not Bigfoot. What's this?
Well, yeah, and they're quite large from what you hear. And I think, I went back, somebody said they were lemur-like in the way they act. The thing is that when people say that, they see all these cute little lemurs over in Madagascar, which they're not any danger to humans at all. Now, there was a giant lemur at one point in time, and it actually lived, and they think that there might actually still be some out there into historical times. But they weren't violent, vile creatures that went around, killing other lemurs or other people or anything like that. They just existed, and they did lemur-type things. They were just big. Well, these things, people have to remember that you got to watch monkeys and even apes, chimpanzees. Not so much with gorillas because they're so big, but you get these chimpanzees out there, and, it goes back to the fast twitch, slow twitch muscles, and they got fast twitch muscles. They can take and leap a tremendous distances and just spring. We can't do that. I mean, yeah, we see gymnasts, but they've been trained to do that. That's not something that we naturally do. I mean, chimpanzee babies when they're born and monkey babies when they're born, by the time they get up and they're kind of hopping around, and once they get up walking and swinging from the trees and everything else, it's amazing to watch how they can leap these huge distances. And I mean, they just go from the ground up into the tree. We can't do that we don't have that ability to do that. And we're kind of earthbound.
What the devil monkeys made me think of is, and if you recall, Deloy's ape in South America.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it just seems. Yeah. I don't remember if they mentioned. I don't think they mentioned those having tails, but aside from that, it seemed very similar.
Yeah, I don't think that we did have a tail.
Yeah, we do need the saber-toothed tiger.
Turn him loose in Alaska. Yeah, but you know what had happened? They'd be feeding on humans because humans are easier to catch.
That's true.
But it's disturbing because, you can't, as even primatologist, anthropologist, or anything, it's like, how do you wrap your mind around that? Okay, we're dealing with Bigfoot, and then we get these stories about giants, and then now we get these stories about long-tailed, 5-foot-tall, vicious, murderous monkeys, and you're like going, my gosh, what the heck else is out there that we don't want to know about?
I was going to say, I think there's more cryptids out there than what we really know that's out there.
Oh, you know it. You know it. We just like to be arrogant and think that we know everything. And you know what? We don't. Not by a long shot.
I'm sure there are other stuff out there. I mean, I just don't go into the crazy train part of it. Well, we all know what the crazy train part is. What I guess what they call the woo factor. All that silly stuff that people come up with. But if you've got a history of something, and I know people are going to get mad. I'm not saying dog man because that's just ridiculous. I think that's a misidentification very clearly. And even Mr. Black said that's most of the time a misidentification. And there's some psychological things that go along with that too, but I'm not going to delve into that. But other things. Now, I don't know about stuff like Chupacabra and all that kind of stuff. You guys remember Art Bell back in the 90s when that was kind of a big deal on his show. And it just sort of, they've made fun of it and everything since then. But and you even see commercials sometimes still on TV where they make references to that as it being kind of a silly idea. But then that's what they do, the naysayers on this stuff. And they may not even be intentionally doing it against the topics when they do these things on television or elsewhere in the public. But it comes out. It's sort of that bias against something they don't really know about. They're just making assumptions.
Well, we have, and you're talking about the chupacabra, and I don't mean to be getting off on another subject, but we have these dog-like canine type creatures that have been found down here in Texas and northern Mexico, that their skin is all a blue-gray color. They have a fine, and the reason I can describe this fairly readily is because a doctor, she actually shot one on her, well, now let me stand corrected. She found this, it was actually, she had seen one on her property. She'd shot at it. She didn't kill that one. So I was about to fib to you. The one that she has mounted in her home was hit on the road. Her neighbor found it and called her, and she came out there and she picked it up. And she actually had the thing DNA tested, and it came back to an unknown canid. Now they are a blue color, the skin, but they have this fine down. It looks almost like they're hairless, but they're really not. They have a kind of a fine down that goes all over them. And they're about the size of a coyote, and they kind of have a coyote cross dog-like appearance. So, and that was running, and they've actually had them picked up on cameras that were in sheriff's vehicles. They've actually seen them. They've either crossed the road, and there was one that down south of San Antonio. The guy actually followed one down the road. It was a sheriff, and so he has it on his camera in the car. So, I don't know how much verified more you could be than, they actually, plenty of people have seen them. And they're supposedly all over Texas. And I hear every once in a while, you'll hear people, there was one sighted over in Blanco County, and you hear them, sighted around here. I don't know what they are, and I don't think anybody else really knows what they are. But, and they live in burrows just like, foxes or coyotes do. So, your guess is as good as mine. But I think there's a lot of things in nature that we don't even have to go into the paranormal. And just like what you're talking about, the woo-woo factor, to find strange things in this world, because I think they're out there. We don't have to go over the line and, to create more stuff, strange stuff.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, especially, something smaller, they just don't pay attention to that kind of stuff. Well, there could be lots of things like that we don't know about.
Forrest, I remember seeing that video with the police chasing it down the road or whatever, and it is pretty strange to look at.
Yeah, and they have a different way of moving too. They don't. They kind of hop sometimes, almost like in a kangaroo fashion. And you'll see them standing up on. That's what this doctor had said, that she had seen hers. And if I remember correctly, I think it was feeding on persimmons. Now, coyotes and foxes around here sometimes will eat the persimmons that we have. A lot of animals will, and humans do it. We do it. I've eaten them before. They're pretty tasty. And so she actually had seen this thing standing up on its hind legs, and wolves will even do that. And I think sometimes that's where you get the confusion with the dog man thing. And we've discussed the dog man before, and I think it's just a different variety, a baboon-like variety of Bigfoot. So
that's
and
something.
Like I say, folks, it's all my opinion.
That's something interesting too, because Carol in Missouri, she's had all these horrific encounters. She recently sent me a picture of something, and it was actually, there was a short video about bonobos, and in the beginning of that there was a piece of artwork that looked pretty creepy, and she said that artwork was very close to what she saw, and I'm kind of suspecting that's one of the variants of the type 3. And if you were to see something like that out there, you might very well say, heck, that's a werewolf. And it's not. It's one of these Bigfoot creatures.
Now, can I correct you on that, Will?
Yeah.
Respectfully correct you. You said bonobos.
I think
you would never see. you did say bonobos. I think you meant the billy apes, or what they
might
are
have been
now
the billy apes,
called
yeah.
the Bondi apes.
I was
It's the billy apes. Yeah, because you sent me a picture of it. That was and I said it looks like a billy ape. And they're now calling them, I think, Bondi apes. So the
Right,
bonobos
okay.
are actually a smaller variety of chimpanzee, and they would never hurt anything.
Yeah, this was the bigger one, the leopard killers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are the ones they're calling Bondi apes now.
And like I said, I think if she did give the correction, or her description, like she said, where this picture, has a little bit lighter face than the surrounding hair. She said the hair was all dark. It was a little bit longer. The face was all darker, and the eyes were dark. And she had a little bit of difference with the nostrils. They were bigger and wider apart. But you could easily call this one of the type 3 creatures.
Well, yeah, and even in Africa, the natives historically spoke of the Bondi, formerly known as, it sounds like formerly known as Prince, yada yada. They're formerly known as billy apes. They will tend to get up and walk bipedally on their own. I mean, quite frequently. So the females will carry their babies that way. So isn't that kind of peculiar?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's just like I said, we get lots of pushback from people who, they're staunch believers in Dogman, and I think that they're, for the most part, it's a misidentification. There's no such thing as werewolves.
Only in the movies.
And I'm sure we'll catch heat over that, but you know what? I don't care. I really don't.
Well, you have to, like I said before, we have enough strange things in nature. We don't need to go start stepping into the paranormal and woo-woo stuff, too. So, and I mean, some of these things kind of make you want to go woo-woo, especially the devil monkeys in Alaska. So, I mean, I had asked Fred to check into that for me, and he's actually gotten real interested in it and has been doing a lot of investigation on that. And I find that to be very interesting, actually, that we might have a long-tail variety of monkeys. And a lot of people say, well, how could you have monkeys and apes up there in Alaska where it's so cold? Might I remind you where the Yeti is always seen? In the frickin' Himalayas. Your Japanese macaques live up in the mountains in the snow. And so there is plenty of traditional appearances of primates in areas that we would think inhospitable actually to have primates develop in those areas. But, we're very adaptable. People are adaptable, so why wouldn't all primates be that way?
Well, humans have filled every kind of climate environment on the planet. So that was one of our big success stories, is that we were able to adapt to all those different environments. So if we could do it, why couldn't other primates do it?
Well, we don't even have a hair coat, and they do.
Exactly. So, and the Yeti, people, that's a misconception a lot of times, that the Yetis are living up in the snowfields when they aren't. There's actually very heavily forested regions just below the snow lines in those regions in Central Asia. So that's primarily where they live. They will go up into the snowfields because that's where, the mountaineers back in the 40s and 50s were finding, lines of footprints, but that's not where the creatures were living. But they still adapt to those regions.
Yeah, there's not a lot of food sources up in those snow regions, but they obviously have absolutely no problem, going over those mountains and moving elsewhere. So, that's when their tracks show up, I think, is what happens there.
And it's even the same here where there's mountainous regions. That's where you find them often, is up in the high country, up near the snow lines.
Yeah. And, primates are curious. Sometimes primates just do what humans do. Hey, I want to go look at this. I'm kind of curious about this. I saw one, and you may know what I'm talking about, that I thought was rather interesting, where a guy was actually on another peak. He was, I don't remember if he was snowshoeing or just climbing or what the heck he was doing, but he was actually on another peak, and this is not really, I mean, they were high up, obviously. They were snow covered, but they weren't, way, way up there. But he looks across and he sees this figure just sitting in the snow across from him. And he actually got several pictures, and it finally, when it realized it was actually on another peak, there was a little bit of a crevasse between them and him and it. And it finally got up, and I looked at that picture, and I couldn't explain it any other way than being a Bigfoot. It didn't look like a human in snow gear. And it turned and looked at him and then proceeded to get up and walk back down the mountain. So, I mean, primates are curious creatures. I mean, you see all the time where people go out in these, jungles and such, and all these little monkeys and stuff will be sitting up there in the trees staring down at them like, what the heck are you doing? And, so, I mean, we're curious. Humans are curious. All primates are curious. And so he might have just been sitting up there admiring the view. I don't know what goes through the mind of a Bigfoot.
Silence again.
Really? I must be saying some thought-provoking statements here. You guys, come on, help me out.
Yeah, we're taking it all in.
Well, come on, guys. I'm not the only one that's ever run this through my mind. Y'all have had to have thought about these things too. What does go through the mind of a Bigfoot?
Food.
Yeah, right. Food.
Yeah.
You see them little hairless, cloth-covered bananas, and just peel them and eat them.
Oh, God.
That reminds me of the cartoon that was in one of John Green's book. It says Dr. Sasquatch, head shrinker on the side of the cave, and the one Sasquatch is laying there on what looks like a couch, and the other one's sitting there with its legs crossed and a yo-yo dangling off its big toe. And he's saying, well, tell me more about these little cloth-covered creatures you've been seeing.
I remember that. Yeah. That was a good one.
Heavens. Well, it's strange that you're saying that now, peel and eat. Now, when a bear attacks somebody and eats them, they eat everything. I mean, they eat right through the, I know this is gross talking about this, folks, but it happens. Let's face it. People get killed by a bear. I don't care what kind of bear it is. They all do the same thing. They eat right through the clothes and everything else. When they find the scat, and this is how they can tell, if they're tracking the bear to try to put it down, capture it, whatever. The scat will have pieces of clothing and this, that, and the other in it. And they just eat the clothes and everything. They're not particular. Now, I do find it strange that we do in some of these, and God, I hate to even bring this up, missing cases that you find clothes that have been taken off of the people. And I know then somebody's going to say, oh, that's the removal, when people get hypothermia and they remove their clothes, yada, yada, yada. I lived in Alaska, and I never heard of anybody taking their freaking clothes off when they got cold. So, hey, I may be wrong, but I never heard about it.
And I don't think those are Bigfoot cases, honestly. I think I've seen things about, serial killers on television where they talk about how, oftentimes the serial killer will do things like that with their victims. It's almost like they have a certain reverence for the person they murdered, and they'll fold their clothes or do things, very meticulously. Especially where we have cases where, the Bigfoot has killed someone and they leave the shoes with the feet behind in them and things like that. They're in stories like the one from Alaska. It was called, I can't think what the name of the article was. It was in Sportsfield magazine in the early 60s, and it was about a group of Den Indians, and they approached the two white guys that were trapping in the area. It was the Gilliuk story, and where the chief had gone these to get these guys because they said they felt that if the white men were in their camp, the creature wouldn't bother them. And apparently the creature got the chief in the middle of the night, and it ripped his night clothes off him, and that's all they found of him. So, those kinds of stories don't have neat clothing folded. So I think those are two completely different cases or types of cases.
Well, I wasn't necessarily referring to that as being Bigfoot, but I was just saying that type of behavior. I could see a Bigfoot removing the clothes before they actually consumed a human if they were going to do something like that. I don't think that they would have bear-like behavior. That's what I was referring to.
You're exactly right.
You know,
but there are people
that they wouldn't just rip into clothes and eat clothing and flesh. So,
but there are people who make that claim. There are those out there that are well known that make that claim, or they lead people to think that without actually saying it, and they're just, to me, that just doesn't fit their behaviors. If they're going to take somebody for that purpose, they're just going to rip the clothes off.
Yeah, I don't know how a Bigfoot would learn to fold clothes anyway.
You're right. Yeah, what model did you follow? We want to know. Well, guys, we're getting close on our time. Anything final before we wrap up this campfire talk, guys?
Bring back the saber-tooth.
Bring back the saber-tooth. We should have a poll out there. Who would like to see the return of the saber-toothed tiger in Central America? Or not Central America, but where they were in North America?
Yeah, they were in North America.
I was thinking of the plains.
Well,
the plains states.
Why stop there?
What's that, Tom?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking of the plains states.
Why stop there?
Central U.S.
Well, if it's possible, and I think that it's technically challenging, to say the least, but it's to bring anything back. But if they could do that, because I've heard about bringing back the Yurok or the aurochs, that massively huge bull that was in Europe. I think the last one was killed sometime in the 1600s. Hey, let's bring back the velociraptors, right? We know how good that will turn out.
I don't know about that. I think I'd rather take the saber-tooth instead of a velociraptor.
Oh.
Really?
Oh boy. All right, I think we'll end the conversation with that. All right, everyone.
Have another beer, Chuck.
Thanks for sitting in with us today, folks.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Creek Devil. If you or anyone you know has had an encounter with these creatures, please contact us at williamjevning@yahoo.com. That's William, Jevning, @yahoo.com. All communication is confidential. Join us for another program next week. And until then, keep your eyes open.